First time that I saw it, it was in 2004 as a video, and I really cried about it. And that's why I decided to study archaeology. That was a motivation for me to study and to save my culture.
Rising up to 53 metres tall, they were the largest standing Buddha statues in the world. Testament to Buddhism in the Bamiyan Valley, the heart of Afghanistan. The sculptures survived for 1,500 years, in spite of Islam and its ban on icons. Then came the Taliban. Amidst international protests, the figures were blown up, erasing a part of Afghanistan's rich history. That was more than 20 years ago. Now that the Taliban is back in power, no one knows what will happen to what remains of the Buddhas of Bamiyan. The trauma lingers. Mansour Alami was a child when the Buddhas were blown up. As his family in Afghanistan didn't have a television, he only saw the destruction later, but he knew the Buddha statues well.
My father told me it is something that has connection with religion. It is our culture, our history, our identity. It's part of our identity, and we should keep it, and we should save it for future generations.
Some want to preserve culture, others want to destroy it. But why? Is this about ideology, religion, or the power to erase and rewrite history? What do Islamists like the Taliban or the terrorist Islamic State group want? Why were members of IS turning the destruction of the ancient multicultural city of Palmyra into a media production that infidels can watch on television? Is it religious fanaticism or clever PR?
It's definitely more about religious fanaticism than anything else. And it is, quite clearly, about taking up space and marking territory. And if there's money to be made from that, even better, because then you can use it to buy weapons.
The black market of antiquities is flourishing. Cultural property is valued worldwide, and it's protected. But why? What do cultural treasures, both our own and those of other countries, mean to us?
If it's worth something to someone, then it's worth protecting.
Because it says a lot about our history. It gives us strength and can be an inspiration.
A record of past cultures is also a good reminder that our own may also perish someday.
We travel 3,350 years back in time to an ancient culture. Revolutionary pharaoh Akhenaten elevated the sun god Aten to the centre of worship, thus upsetting the ancient Egyptian pantheon of gods. Aten, represented by the disk of the sun, protected the divine family, the pharaoh, his wife Nefertiti and their daughters. Here they all look rather strange. Akhenaten also revolutionised the art of portraiture. The distinctive elongated heads are not owed to any illness, as was previously thought, but reflect the new Amarna style. Akhenaten broke radically with the past. He suppressed old cults, abolished the priesthood of Amun, and made plenty of enemies as a result. When the pharaoh died after a 20-year reign, his portraits were no longer wanted, and many were destroyed.
People did not believe in what this man had initiated, so they actively wanted to oppose it. Successors deliberately destroyed any images and reliefs of Pharaoh Akhenaten. They were probably only given the order to destroy any visible traces of this pharaoh after leaving the capital, Tel El Amarna.
den Befehl erteilt, zerstört, was immer ihr von diesem Pharao seht. Damit
That way he would disappear from the historiography of Egyptians once and for all.
The only female pharaoh did not fare any better. Although Hatshepsut was often portrayed with a ceremonial beard like her male peers, a woman pharaoh was too much to handle for her contemporaries. They erased her image. This scandalous woman was not to be remembered. Hatshepsut's teacher was also posthumously disgraced, guilty by association. His inscription was partially scratched off. The erasure of memory, whether for religious or power political reasons, is so common in history that there is even a specific term for it: damnatio memoriae, censoring the memory of disagreeable predecessors. This practice was especially common in the Roman Empire. This panel painting depicts Emperor Septimius Severus and his family. The missing face is that of his son, Geta, who was murdered by his own brother, who then had his image erased.
Often the images of certain personalities that were destroyed, both statues and illustrations, or mosaics for example, were done in such a way that you can see that something has been erased. It was virtually forbidden to talk about it, but everyone could see it. So it was a warning at the same time. Someone was not only made to be forgotten in a sense, but the forgetting itself is what was remembered.
The conundrum. If posterity still remembers the erasure of a person after a long time, were they really forgotten? Or are they remembered even more for being erased? With paintings, it's usually clear who was erased and why, but that's not the case with sculptures. How do we know whether the bust of this Prussian ruler was deliberately whacked in the nose, or if it simply fell off? In museums, sculptures used to be given a new nose job, so to speak. Nowadays, they prefer to show the missing pieces on the face and to try to find explanations. The Sphinx of Giza is also missing its nose, and researchers are still trying to work out why. The creators of the cartoon series Asterix apparently found the nose mystery so intriguing that they decided to have their character Obelix accidentally break it off, with the subtle message, "Don't have your nose in the air." Jokes aside, this was a serious matter in Egypt, where tampering with a statue was treated like a personal assault.
Every statue was a kind of substitute body for the owner, which was either placed in the temple or in the tomb. And through a ritual known as the opening of the mouth, this statue was granted a kind of vitality. When its nose was broken off, the statue was deprived of its ability to breathe. This would prevent the person that the statue symbolized from living in eternity.
Diese Tat ausführt, den Tod dieser Person in der Ewigkeit.
Even though Greek statues were not quite as spirited, many of them are also missing pieces, and it's often the most important part, the head. It's evident that there has been a lot of modification. Late antique figures and imagery of pagan gods did not fit in with the rise of Christianity. But heads were not the only things that rolled. Naked men were not welcome in Christianity either. Their more delicate parts were initially chiselled off, later replaced by the famous fig leaf.
If you compare what happened in antiquity with what the Taliban or the so-called Islamic State have done, we don't have any images from the Greek and Roman antiquity that clearly show these pieces being desecrated, like the toppling of statues, for example. It was done. It was transcribed into literature. But it wasn't done for publicity. A Roman emperor would never have promoted himself as someone who would topple the statue of his predecessor.
The first major dispute over religious iconography occurred during the Byzantine Empire. Were images of Jesus, Mary and the saints allowed? And could they also be worshipped? Many followers of the Orthodox Catholic faith believe that icons are powerful protectors. But 8th century emperors considered them blasphemous. The cross was the only thing that mattered to them. Emperor Constantine V was also an iconoclast. He persecuted people who worshipped icons and had those icons destroyed, a cultural struggle that flared up again 800 years later. A new iconoclasm swept through European churches during the Reformation. The new Christian doctrine spread by Martin Luther was strictly against so-called idolatry. Churches were looted as a result, and thousands of paintings, along with other medieval artworks, went up in flames.
The very strict Calvinists in particular had a very strong desire to assert their power in this way. They enforced the ban of icons in such a way that was really destructive. Sometimes they also incited a crowd to participate, which included looting. It must also be said that these iconoclasms at times had a pure financial motive, because items could be sold for a profit, or if they were made of gold or silver, melted down.
Many people regarded the church's wealth as a huge thorn in their side, especially the so-called indulgence trade, where followers could secure their place in heaven with donations of a certain amount, which generated a lot of income for the Catholic clergy. Anger about the church's pomp and power was directed towards these practices, and it was difficult to control in some places. The great preacher Martin Luther tried to pacify followers, but his influence did not reach across borders. Iconoclasm raged in Switzerland and later in England. Religion was not the only thing that incited feelings of hatred. Politics did too. In 1789, during the French Revolution, protesters manned the barricades for liberty and other rights. Once again, statues were beheaded, this time those of absolutist kings. But the fight for freedom turned into chaos and brutal violence, not only against people, but against icons and art from the royal palaces, anything that represented the hated feudal aristocracy. Abbé Grégoire, a bishop and member of the National Assembly, condemned all acts of extremism and vandalism. He asserted that cultural property should be protected.
He coined something that still influences us today, namely the idea of cultural heritage. One should not destroy any preceding cultural monuments, even if they are connected to French kings, because they are monuments of society as a whole, and because they were crafted by Frenchmen. Even if they are connected with French kings, they are still monuments that represent cultural heritage. And this idea that contemporary society can inherit something from an earlier culture runs through the language of cultural heritage.
Radical rethinking with an impact. Since the Hague Convention of 1954, cultural heritage sites have been defined as something of global value that must be protected. There are now more than 1,150 world cultural and natural heritage sites listed by UNESCO. Iran alone has a particularly high number of cultural heritage sites, 24. Not only is Naqsh Jahan Square in Isfahan one of the largest and most beautiful sites in the world, it's also a tourist magnet. But these sites came under political fire in 2019. After an Iranian general was assassinated by the US military, then President Donald Trump threatened to attack sites important for Iranian culture in case of retaliation.
Those statements put him on the same level as the Taliban, and IS in particular, which has been very destructive in recent years. This rhetoric approves this method as an element of warfare, and that's why we want the destruction of cultural heritage recognized as a war crime. That means that the UN and the International Court can become resources to protect cultural heritage sites and prosecute crimes against them as crimes against humanity.
In fact, in 2016, the UN sentenced a member of an Islamist terrorist group to 9 years in prison for the destruction of cultural heritage. The mausoleums in Mali and the desert city of Timbuktu were centuries-old pilgrimage sites. There are also fears that cultural treasures could be destroyed in the current war in Ukraine, but there have been no targeted attacks so far. Fortunately, most cultural heritage sites around the world have been spared destruction, but monuments continue to stir up emotions. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fate of its monuments was called into question, especially the many statues of the socialist hero Lenin. The effigy unveiled in what was then East Berlin became a political issue after the fall of the wall. People in Berlin were no longer so keen to have what they regarded to be an ideologically contaminated statue. But in 1991, to the regret of some who had lived in East Berlin, the statue of Lenin started to be dismantled. It was broken up into 125 pieces, which were then buried outside Berlin. In his film Goodbye Lenin, director Wolfgang Becker resurrected the communist revolutionary and had him fly through Berlin like some angel of utopian illusion, as if saying farewell to socialism. It placed a seal of finality on the fact that the better world Lenin had fought so hard for had never come to be. Back to reality. After much debate, in 2015, Lenin, or at least his head, was exhumed. The 3.5-ton head found a new resting place in Spandau's Citadel Museum, after dodging initial flak from various authorities and West Germans who'd rather the socialist idol stay buried.
There were political factors that argued against it. Some people worried that Russia, no longer the Soviet Union of course, would demand that the entire monument be restored. Others worried that backward-looking former East Germans would make it a pilgrimage site, and that could blow up into a big problem. Meanwhile, sand lizards, which are protected species, had taken up residence in the remnants, so they had to be meticulously caught by hand, along with all their families, before the pieces could be dug up.
Old heroes, defunct rulers and dictators, whether they're in Latin America or in the Arabic-speaking world, they all receive the same treatment. Rebels in Syria toppled Bashar al-Assad's father and predecessor on his behalf. In the countryside, a statue of Hafez al-Assad was also destroyed. The more severe the oppression, the more violent the retribution. Regime changes have often been celebrated by toppling monuments in Europe too. The killing of a black man by police brutality outraged millions, and not just in the USA. The Black Lives Matter movement targets racism and its historical legacy. The statues of Confederate generals and the slavery they defended. The monuments had to go. The same fate was in store for the rediscover of America. Christopher Columbus, restyled as a harbinger of colonialism and target of heated emotional debate. History may be re-evaluated, but the treatment of newly disgraced monuments remains the same. Out of sight, out of mind.
All the decades of lobbying for a suitable context to be created for these monuments and public spaces, and not just for them to be left standing or simply destroyed, and this can be researched and attested, have been swept away unheeded. I could understand such a wave of rage taking shape, but personally I feel bad in the pit of my stomach whenever something like that is just destroyed.
What about the monuments like this one to Otto von Bismarck, first Chancellor of the German Empire? He presided over the infamous Berlin Conference that laid down regulations for carving up Africa and the Pacific into colonies. Should he go the way of the Confederate generals? No, said the artist duo Various and Gould. Instead, the statesman out of favour should don new colours this summer. It took them 3 months of hard work to give the grand old white man a new papier-mâché coat of many colours.
Essentially, I see our project as a kind of mediation, where the rethinking takes place in people's minds, and we hope this temporary alteration will bring about such a rethinking.
You could say our project, Monumental Shadows, is an intermediate stage. It has to be, since once we're gone, the monuments will still be standing there as always. So it's not like we can pat ourselves on the back and say it was a job well done. In any case, something more has to happen. We're hoping for some discussion at least, because these are monuments to violence.
The art project has already led many viewers to see old Bismarck with new eyes. His coloured outer skin may not have exonerated him, but perhaps it's demystified him a little. This playful approach to this and other colonial-era monuments to come in other countries tends to raise some more basic questions.
In the end, because of the material qualities of paper, monumental shadows raises the question, do monuments really have to be meant for eternity? And if they're not for eternity, do we have to have this kind of thing at all? Can't we think along more temporary lines?
Have the artists become saviours who can show the way out of the historical cycle of toppling monuments one after another?
As things stand, artists have to deal with whatever society or government can't manage any other way. That includes an artistic perspective on monuments, raising anti-monuments or handling them some other way, maybe with holograms or something. It could also be something really exciting or interesting, or creating something temporary. That can be exciting too. I'm of the firm conviction that in a democracy, it can be really wonderful to have so many different possibilities.
The more possibilities, the harder the choice. The debate over the monument to freedom and unity for Germany's reunification raged for nearly 15 years. Do we need a monument at all? If so, where? The result was this gigantic seesaw.
We're getting along quite well without this monument. And I think someday many people will say we could have done just as well without it. The permanent designation of a spot that you attribute some event to will live on. The form that recognition takes has softened a bit. It's no longer as figurative or martial in form. And given our digitally dominated lives, it would be nice to have some kind of supplemental digital imagery that could in turn be changed someday. But the monument it goes with, and that marks the spot, would remain unchanged.
Even in Bamiyan, not everyone is willing to consign the empty space left by the Buddha statues to oblivion. But any attempt to restore them would cost millions of euros, money desperately needed by the many starving Afghans. What speaks for the restoration of cultural heritage once destroyed? Are digital or 3D printed solutions a possibility? But who would these fake copies serve? Not the archaeologists. Mansour Alami hopes the Taliban will keep their promise and protect what remains of the Buddhas.
They are saying that they are protecting, but nobody knows, because anytime they can change their mind and they do something. They're starting because now they are new and then they don't know how to do it, but we don't know what's happening in future.
Will the Taliban preserve cultural heritage? Manzoor Alami isn't the only one with doubts. This makes the work of conservators even more essential.
We say it in Afghanistan, a nation is stay alive when its culture is alive. So if we don't have culture, we are nothing. So if we see it worldwide, this is the same. We are nothing. This is our past. We should know what's our past and what's our culture, how was our culture. It's a part of our identity. It's international identity.
Is cultural heritage important to you? Are there any controversial monuments in your country? Let us know in the comments and hit the subscribe button.